Welcome back to HTM Insider. As you know, I'm Sherelle, your host with Multi Medical Systems, and I'm pretty excited about our topic today as it's something that we haven't really touched on before. And maybe some of you are curious out there on what you can do with your assets when they become end of life, or you just need to get rid of them. Today we have on Patrick Kelly. And, Patrick, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience and let them know your experience with HTM and what you do in general. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much. Full name is Patrick Joseph Kelly, and I've been in this industry for a little over 22 years now. I am a licensed auctioneer and a certified appraiser. Do apologize if I do talk a little bit too fast because I do sometimes have to do the 10 bid to go 20, got 20 bid to go 30 bid to go 40, 40, the old auctioneer chanting.
I
And
love
that's how we
that.
sell a lot of our medical equipment here, home to the highest bidder, as we call it. So my background is fairly simple. I grew up ski patrol, and my mom was a nurse, and I wanted to work in healthcare. And I was also a little bit of an environmentalist, and I wanted to figure out a way to, on a sustainable front, keep things out of the landfill and pick an industry and a vertical, or more or less a niche within healthcare that I can really help solve some problems. And so it was 2003 that I got into this industry and finding out what happens to all these life-saving devices. What do hospitals do with their old medical equipment? What do hospitals do with their excess supplies? What happens? And so the more I got involved into this, I've always been an entrepreneur. I moved down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to work with my first company there, and it was called Med Marketplace, and it was more or less a durable medical equipment company that had the idea of solving a problem of excess storable equipment that comes back. And after analyzing the industry, we really found that there was a much bigger problem to solve, and that's within large health systems, IDNs, hospitals that have no plan in place for their old medical equipment. And as we looked into it a little bit further, traditionally hospitals are kind of scared about their excess equipment that's going out, as if it can have PHI on it. It can end up in the landfill and they can get fined. So a lot of them were just throwing out all of these, valuable precious metals or life-saving devices and putting them in the landfills. So it became my personal lifelong mission as to educate health systems on what to do, how to proactively plan for these assets. And by doing so now, I've led many companies to whether it's an exit or it's a merger. And the idea is now very simple for the rest of my career. It's all about understanding the data that hospitals have and then how to proactively plan for it. Um, I've got a lot to talk about today. We can go through as many questions as you'd like to give me, but I'm an arsenal of knowledge when it comes to planning for the excess medical equipment departure.
Well, I love it. And I love the fact that you're an auctioneer. I would like to play one sometime on TV. No, just kidding. I try. I talk fast, but I just get tied up with it. La, 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 la. It seems easier than what it is. I've tried. I don't think I can do it, but I love to watch auctioneers at work. So
Sure.
do you have auctions live where people come in and buy the equipment? And is it other hospital systems that are looking to buy the equipment? I'm curious.
We do. So currently we have a few different companies here, and I'm CEO of Plan Medical. And our whole goal here of Plan Medical is to provide hospitals with data so that they can proactively plan for their excess medical equipment. And then depending on what they want to do with that equipment, some of them have major storage issues. They're in huge metropolitan areas, and they need to get it out right away. If that's the case, then we'll bring it to one of our sister companies. We have a company called Global Medical Auction. We've got warehousing in Austin, in Tampa Bay, Florida, and also in Long Island, New York. And so at that point, we could bring it in, we test the equipment, and we host a monthly auction. At that
Okay.
point, we're selling to over 60 different countries. And so we've gotten
Wow.
very good at marketing this equipment worldwide. So depending on the asset, it might stay in the United States, it might go worldwide. And so but that's the beauty of putting it up for an auction. It goes to the highest bidder wherever they may be. Traditionally, we see about 60% of the equipment stays back in the United States. And what that is that they're either here for part systems, trying to keep the existing assets alive, and those make and models for long past the manufacturer has actually discontinued those assets. And if they are newer working assets, we know a lot of the big university hospitals, the more profitable hospitals, they like to replace their equipment, really every 5 to 8 years. And so if they're a newer piece of equipment, chances are they're going to go back into another facility. Um, and then if it's a part system or an older piece of equipment, chances are they'll go overseas. So a couple different methodologies. The way that we sell is either on site at the hospital location,
Oh, wow.
and
I didn't know that.
yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
And other, we can bring it out to one of our locations and host a monthly auction here. And we used to do the live auction process. It's actually much more efficient for us to do an eBay style, which is a timed auction. And we host it. They pretty much start on a Friday, end on a Wednesday, so they'll be up for sale for 5 days. And typically on that last day is when a lot of the action occurs, and people are outbidding each other, and it's sold to the highest bidder on that date. So
So when you sell it, if you're selling it for a hospital system who has excess inventory or end of life inventory, do they get paid?
yes, yes.
Okay.
So depending on how we structure a deal with the hospital, it's either consignment, which is we're partnered up with a hospital and we put that equipment up for an auction, and then we take a percentage of the final sale. So, and typically, if it's a local, we'll go pick it up. If it's outside of our range, then we'll charge a shipping fee to get the equipment. We do white glove service. So they'll blanket wrap the asset and they'll ship it to us. And then from there, our team here will clean the asset, make sure there's no PHI on it, and then we'll put the equipment up for sale. And we'll take up to 10 pictures of the asset, including it turned on, with any screens that shows that the equipment's in good working order or not working at all, so that our buyers can have as much information as possible. We do always set it up so that our
Interesting.
buyers can also inspect the assets prior to purchasing an asset if they want to come in and check it out.
Interesting. So if I'm a clinical engineering manager and I have excess beds lining my hallway that we no longer need, or any medical equipment for that matter, am I the person that reaches out, or is there somebody else at the hospital that reaches out to you? And how can clinical engineering HTM work in conjunction to make this happen?
Sure. So, really, two sides to the hospital. There's the financial side and the operations side. Financial planning side is going to be planning for the purchase of the new assets. And typically, what I like to do is work with the biomed, the HTM side, find out what is end of life. We'll go throughout any CMMS and we'll sort the database by age of equipment, whether or not it's active, inactive, retired, and try to give a roadmap to the facility. We know if the Joint Commission shows up and there's beds in the hallway or broken
Mhm.
defibrillators laying around, they can get dinged, and that's what we don't want. So there's really two ways we can look at it, and every hospital is different depending on who handles asset disposal. Step one for me when I go in and consult with a hospital is let me understand your process. Do you have your protocols documented?
What are your
That needs to be documented for the Joint Commission, the DNV. They'll come back and they'll check on it to make sure that the process is actually documented and that you've got a good process. In this day and age, it's fairly simple to have a process that has digital signatures. Why is the equipment coming to the end of life? Has Biomed checked it out? Is it too costly to fix? Is it being replaced? What is going on with the asset that it needs to leave a facility? So from that aspect, we'll find out if the hospital is either has an outsourced, like either your firm or a Renovo or whoever it might be, or it's they're an in-house hospital, and in that case, biomedical a team. So we would work with them, find out, like I said, what is the current process, and who signs off on it. Sometimes it might require 3 or 4 signatures all the way going up to a CFO, or it could be vice president of supply chain or a controller. And understanding that process, also understanding what documentation they have. Is there an asset disposal form? doesn't have the proper actual verbiage that prevents any downstream liability, which means that if an asset is sold, it'll never come back to the hospital, in any sort of litigation or any lawsuit. So we check on that verbiage, make sure that it all looks good, make sure the process is documented. And then moving forward, the way that we really like to do it is working with a conjunction of the supply chain and biomed. So, like I said, typically biomed is in charge of doing the preventative maintenance, making sure that the last entry is in date. That date is very important to us. So we
Hmm.
do work with them to find out what condition the assets are in. And when we sell equipment, we always sell it as is, where is. So there is no warranties. There's nothing about the equipment, condition-wise, that the buyer of it would ever have to come back to the hospital. So typically working with biomed to understand either the last preventative maintenance that's fully intact. If it's actually like an installed imaging piece, we might need to talk to them about any information that we would need that would help sell the asset. For instance, a CAT scan might have scan seconds, tube count, date of installation, any other software or assets that might be coming alongside with it, in terms of the treadmill or the workstation, things like that. So we get as much information as possible and we make it as easy as possible. To what we know that typically biomed is not, they're extremely busy trying to make
Hmm.
sure all the assets are working in good order. So as easy as we can make our process, either sending our team in to remove the assets or to be working with the hospital. Like I said, it could be their loading manager. Sometimes it's purchasing materials that are going to either point at the asset and say these assets need to be removed. So we make a plan in terms of how we're going to remove it, understanding, do our trucks need lift gates? Do you have a loading dock? Typical information like that.
So let me ask you this. You talked a little bit about patient history on a device. Are you in charge of that, or is the facility in charge of it? And what about removing like all identifying stickers as far as last PM dates or the company that did the last PM or repair on it?
Sure.
Do you guys do that?
Great question. So, hospital has to, by FDA guidelines, is remove. They are responsible, and biomed is responsible for moving PHI. What we do is a double check, and if there is, all of our agents here and our team have to pass a test that we give them out, which is any asset they look, they turn it on, make sure that there's any PHI. If they do find any, the asset has to go into quarantine. And then on that, we
Oh.
reach back out to the hospital and say these assets have not been fully PHI removed. And then we can do a couple things. Either we can remove it ourselves, which is record a video and send it back. If they're okay with that, that's fine. If not, sometimes they'll send somebody out, or we'll send the asset back. Worst case scenario. But it is nice to know that there is a double check, and that's what we do to make sure that PHI information is not out open to the public. It does get a little bit cumbersome, and I will just say this: a lot of manufacturers and sometimes biomeds just remove hard drives, and that's how you destroy the value of an asset by removing the software. We can't boot it up, and it's hard to sell an asset. So every single piece of medical equipment has a very simple way to remove PHI on it, and so we encourage hospitals to remove it properly. We double check that, but please don't remove hard drives.
That's a good note. Yep, I would say that'd be very important. What about if a hospital just is closing down or a surgery center is closing down, and they just need to get rid of everything? Is it? I mean, I come from a surgical background, so we're talking stainless instrumentation, endoscopes, all that. Is that part of it, or is that something different?
That's all part of it.
Okay.
Wish we had more time. I'd give you a tour of our warehouse. We've got 30,000 square feet here, and every month there's an auction. So there's every type of piece of medical equipment that you can name up, from aesthetic lasers. We even say from bedpans to CAT scans. So it'll sometimes have boxes filled with surgical instrumentation. Our team, tries to make kits, puts them back together. If it's aesthetic lasers, like I said, we're going to turn them on, check them out. If it's ultrasounds, we're going to try to, like I said, get the most value out of everything possible. So putting them back together. Uh, the one thing we try to avoid though here is generic IT equipment, which is old computers, and more or less just patient room furniture. Um, uh, you know, waiting tables, things like that. But as far as exam tables and any other type of equipment like that, we bring it all in. OR tables, clean it, and to answer your question before too, take off the stickers. We want to give
Yeah.
as little anonymity as possible from our buyers where this equipment is coming from. And so we clean the equipment, we take off any stickers, any biomed stickers, and we put them up for sale.
Now, do you only sell them by auction, or can someone go on to your site and say, I just want to buy these 10 beds?
Uh, we can have the ability to do whatever we would like to do.
Okay.
So, my favorite part of this industry is working with equipment planners that are building new hospitals, new facilities. And what we see is that a lot of these huge construction budgets go well over their initial
Hmm.
cost. And sometimes the capital budget does get cut, so they need to save money. And they'll reach out to us. What I've done now for 20 plus years is work with pretty much every certified pre owned vendor in the United States. And so, if a hospital wants to buy surgical beds, we know who the best refurbishers are in the United States, and we can recommend where they buy their certified pre-owned equipment that comes with anywhere from a 1 to 5 year warranty. Um, they can buy directly from us, come and inspect the equipment, and if it has a high enough value, well, we'll think that it's worthwhile for us not to put it up to auction. We have the ability to do that, and that's up to the auctioneer's discretion, aka me. And so we do also play matchmaker. And for instance, I liquidated a hospital a couple of years ago outside of Chicago, and it was a 230 bed facility that shut down. And we had a hospital in Wisconsin that was being built, and they came in there and pretty much wrote a 7 figure check to buy almost 3/4 of the assets. So it was a good deal for everybody, including the health system consigning it to us. And then the remaining assets we brought off site and we liquidated them there. So we do have that ability to do that as well.
That's awesome. I mean, we know healthcare costs are rising, and it's not just, the cost to the patient, but the cost to run a facility. And I love that you're keeping things out of landfills and you're bridging that gap. I think that's really important. Now, on the planning side, I've heard you talk a little bit about, coming in on the forefront and then, looking at end of life. When should they get you involved? When's the optimum time? Or do you just get a lot of last minute calls that say, "Come get this stuff. I need it gone today because DMV is coming next week"?
Sure. It's a little bit of both. What I prefer when I
Mm-hmm.
meet with a hospital, it's step one. I'll look in definitive healthcare, wherever it may be, and find out what their fiscal year starts. And then 90 days before that is typically budget season. And as they're working on budget season, I'm going to ask for biomed their end of life report. And so on two fronts here. One is it's the best to get me engaged early, because having the data is really important for them to understand how manufacturers behave. How does their trade desk behave? And so before this, I worked with a company, and we had a partnership with MD Byline.
Mm-hmm.
And so within MD Byline, I got to analyze over 300 manufacturers and represent their data back to them. It was very interesting.
Oh,
So I had over
interesting.
36,000 capital quotes. I would take GE and I would say, okay, GE, I'm looking at your quotes, and I can see that the way that you buy back your CAT scans, whether or not it's GE buying back their own piece of equipment on a trade in, or they buying back a Philips, Hitachi, Canon, or a Siemens piece of equipment, and I'd analyze it and say that your trade in works X. So when I look to a hospital and understand what equipment are you replacing next year, step one is let's get a fair market value. What is the best way to determine what that piece of medical equipment is worth? And is the manufacturer giving you a fair deal? If they're going to give you a fair deal, then we'd always advise take it. So let's give you an actual fair market value or an appraisal on that piece of equipment. So I
Okay.
created something called the Kelly Green Book.
Uh-huh.
and it's similar to the Kelly Blue Book. And we have a database that we're entering all of our auction values, all of our appraised values into our database, and it helps me to be able to forecast what these assets are worth. So that coupled with all the experience that I have with MD Byline, it's amazing for me to see when the best time to trade in your Olympus equipment is, or buy new Olympus equipment for that matter.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting.
yeah, so the best time to get me involved is typically prior to their fiscal year. And then when I do a proactive plan, it's you have a plan of what you're estimated on replacing next year. So then we're going to go research what the equipment you are actually replacing, compare that to your end of life report, and we're going to evaluate that equipment and then more or less understand there's no need for excess equipment storage if you're streamlined. So, typically hospitals like to take things out, throw it in storage, and that's to me is wasting a lot of time, money, energy, moving things from one place to another. And this is time that HTM doesn't necessarily have. And
Right.
then it sits and collects dust in another facility. So, step one, let's do a spring cleaning. Let's find out any excess. Let's clean out those old closets. Let's get rid of anything. Step two, let's proactively plan for the following year. Um,
Let me ask you this. It just came to mind. So, a large health system, they've got 12 hospitals, say. Now, Hospital A is on this schedule because it was built here. Hospital B and C and D are over here at different times. Do you help them like switch equipment, or like this is in your storage and you need this, so let's get this over here?
yes.
Okay,
So we've
great.
we built. I'd love to share eventually, but you can go to some of our IDM websites, and typically, if I work with an IDN like HCA, Tenant, any of them, I've worked with them in the past at previous companies, and what we would do is we'd set up Tenant Health Marketplace, HCAMarketplace.com.
Oh, okay. That's
And at that
awesome.
point, it's a private, more or less, portal that they can see what's excess within their health system and they can internally transfer it. I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's less than 1% of the equipment actually gets transferred from one site to another.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, it's great when you're doing relocations, closures. But taking equipment actually that's at the end of its life, and it's a lot of hospitals are past the life expectancy. That equipment needs to more or less go and get recertified and out almost on the secondary market, rebuilt, and then put back into another health system. So it works great when you have, like I said, a complete facility closure or department closure, and you want to take that from one site to another. I highly suggest there's some databases out there where you can know what relocations are happening in the United States. And typically, when I present
Interesting.
to an IDN, I go back
Mm-hmm.
and I pull a list of all their new construction and say, this is what you're planning to do next year. Are you still on track for it? And can we help assist with the transfer of equipment from one facility to another? But typically, when hospitals are getting rid of assets, we put them up there. It very rarely gets transferred from one to another. And I'm being brutally honest here. I've been doing it for 20 plus years. We push the whole internal transfer marketplace feature, and it sounds lovely, but in reality, it's not necessarily getting transferred as much as you would think. So we still do it. We still help with it, and there's a time and place that it works really well. Also, if equipment has not reached the end of its life and it's got a high book value, that's a great time because it's still got either warranty and that can go out into another department within another health system. So we'll create the technology, we'll have the push notification, sending it out to all the materials managers. And if they want to request an asset, they can, and we can also help with the shipping of the asset if need be.
So, is it better to get rid of your equipment prior to end of life as a hospital system?
Yes. So there's a couple of things. So this is always on my desk. It's the estimated useful life of depreciable assets by the AHA guideline. And it's a very interesting concept of a hospital putting a book value, assigning a capital asset, and whether or not it's fully depreciated. If it does have book value, what does that mean? But more or less, it's understanding the pattern of the manufacturer and what's going on with that. So maybe 6 months ago, hospitals replacing all their Baxter pumps. And we let them know that there were some FDA recalls, a bunch of other things. So we recommend doing that sooner than later because the excess medical equipment that's coming onto the market is going to devalue those pumps that you have, and doing that deal would actually be over seven figures. It's a little over $2.5 million worth
Wow.
of yeah. So, and there's a lot of criteria that comes down to it. If HCA says we're replacing all of our pumps or beds or ventilators next year, you're talking hundreds of thousands of assets that are going to hit the secondary market, and the pricing of those is going to fluctuate. So it's my job as an appraiser to make sure that I understand what's happening with this, and then advising hospitals when the best time to actually sell their medical equipment is. And very rarely it actually goes up in value, but with worldwide pandemics and supply chain shortages and FDA recalls, there are certain instances where that does happen. And like I said, advising hospitals while they're doing their fiscal planning is great to get me involved, and I can share some of that knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know what I was just thinking of was COVID. I imagine that your company was very busy during COVID, and did you just run out of equipment? Was there any equipment left on the shelves?
A lot of different things happen over COVID. Worldwide, you see a lot of different supply chain issues. Even the major manufacturers couldn't get the supplies that they needed to sometimes make their new equipment. So, um,
Right.
old equipment was exponentially, going through the roof. Everybody needed used beds, and everybody was in panic mode. So we got to help a lot of facilities acquire old equipment. I mean, we were donating uh, pallets and boxes of gloves and all other stuff that typically wouldn't have any secondary resale value. But we were able to at least help and share this equipment with a lot of these facilities. And also, we know where all the equipment is. We know all the different types of refurbishers, and pretty much what their supply chain has on stock. So we can reach out to them and help connect them with hospitals that are looking for their type of equipment. So we've got a lot of good networking.
That's awesome. So when an HTM director, a system director, a manager of any hospital in facilities, I would imagine too, would be a good connection. If they wanted to find out more about it, what are the steps and how do they reach out? What's first on the list to do? Send you an email, call
Yeah,
you?
sure. They can either send to info at Plan Medical. You can reach out to me directly, Patrick at planmedical.com. And with that, within 24 hours, we're back to them. And whatever they might need, if they have a list of assets that they're looking for an appraisal on, if they have a big capital project coming up, if they want to get proactive, they know Jayco's coming, and they got to figure out what is excess. And typically, hospitals aren't in the business of selling old medical equipment. So
Yeah.
it's a very tricky thing. One of my favorite things about what I do is I'm not trying to sell a hospital something. I'm trying to get hospitals back money. So they like me because we're giving them back towards their savings goals. We're actually able to write them checks going back that
Hmm.
can help the bottom line. So it's a good way to look at what we're doing as we don't cost anything. Um, and I think it's also really fair for me to say that with capital planning, every procurement manager, every materials supply chain director has a savings goal.
Hmm.
And so when I do proactive planning, it's a hard thing for me. I always ask a hospital, how much money did you get back in your excess medical equipment last year? That includes trade-ins, it includes anything. And very
Right.
rarely do they understand what that number is. They don't know. And so we typically like to put a savings goal of 5 to 10% of their capital spent.
That's a big number.
Yeah, AHA in 2017 said the average 100-bed hospital spends about $10 million in capital equipment per year. So that could be an additional $500,000 per 100-bed facility. That goes back to the bottom line.
Right.
So, and also, if hospitals like to donate equipment, it's a very interesting thing that they like to do. And when we look at it, and for years and years and years, we see there might be a disaster. There might be an earthquake in Haiti.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden they're like, all right, send all of our equipment down there. You're sending broken defibrillators and old stuff that may or may not work. They don't need that.
Right.
typically the best thing to do is to sell the assets and to give them the money. That way they can buy the supplies or anything that they actually need, or to buy a refurbished piece of equipment. So, and typically a lot of these hospitals donate medical equipment, and those third party donation companies reach out to us to sell the assets and then buy the equipment that they need. So, it's also really important for hospitals to get appraisals. They can theoretically get a tax write off if they're for profit. It's an 8283 form. I am a certified appraiser. So I'll fill out an evaluation, give it back to them. And even if they're not for profit, they can also show the community that they're giving back on a monetary level. So having that certified appraisal is very important for getting rid of that old medical equipment. Um, like I said, not for profit or for profit.
I've loved talking with you today, Patrick, on this topic. I think it's very important to keep these devices out of our landfills and to keep our patient history safe and to get monies back into our hospitals. So I think there's so much more to discuss and uncover what you do. I'm interested in seeing you do the auctioneer deal. So make sure you send me the next link so I could watch. Not that I'm buying anything, but I'm interested to see how it all works.
Sure.
With that, it's been a pleasure having you on today, but we always finish every episode of HTM Insider with a wow, words of wisdom. So, Patrick, what do you have for us today?
My words of wisdom would be try to solve pain, undercover problems, and that's been my whole thing in my career is just try to make people's lives easier and solve that, whether it be technology or service. So if I interview any hospital, their system directors, what keeps them up at night? It might be Jayco coming in. It might be their mismanaged inventory. It might be their old equipment. It might be their budgets that are off, and helping them solve any sort of pain that they have, making their lives easier. So if you can find the pain and you can solve some problems, you're going to do well. Also by making money and helping them at the same time.
I love it. I love it. And we'll make sure to post your contact information with this podcast. And if you guys have any questions or you can't find Patrick, contact me and I'll make sure you get in touch with him. It's something to take back to your teams, to your leaderships, and say, can we think about this differently? It's a good question to ask. And HTM, you deserve to be in this conversation because you
Yeah.
can make a difference.
Savings goals. Bring money
Yes.
back to the hospitals. Get that proactively planned in advance.
Yep. I love it. Planning, right? So thank you all again for tuning in to another episode of HTM Insider. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find us any place you listen to your favorite podcast, and including YouTube. Check us out on multimedicalsystems.com where all the episodes are listed. And if you're looking for CE credits, make sure you share with your friends that are CBETs that if they listen through TechNation, that if any of the podcasts, they're all on there. You get one CE credit for each episode. Patrick, thanks again for coming on today, and I look
My
forward to
pleasure.
talking to you again in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.